So, what interests me about these common greetings in several languages is that they all recognize that we are going. All of these end with words for go. So they recognize that life is what I would call telic, right? From the Greek word telos, which means goal. We live goal-oriented lives. Even getting out of bed in the morning, we look toward the things of the day. We are telic creatures. Can you say telic? We are always moving toward something, and that's normal. We seek good things each day. We seek good things in our lives, whether those are relationships, solid, secure, life-giving relationships, a modicum of success, right? An ability to actually learn, move forward, realize some of our God-given potentials. Obviously, we move towards security and a certain amount of control. Control sometimes has a bad name, but no, we want a certain amount of control, right? We want control of our finances, control of our time, control of our health, insofar as we can have those. And speaking of health, we always move toward health, right? Especially when you're sick. And we also move toward meaning and hope. Where life gets hopeless, we start looking for hope. Where we kind of lose the thread, you might be losing the thread like now, like, why am I in school again? I'll tell you why. Because it is a good. And so, but sometimes we have to put together that meaning again and move toward that. And of course, we're always looking for more time. So we are telic creatures. We're always moving toward some kind of goal. But of course, if you're always moving, you occasionally run into things. You run into other movers. You run into other things. We are limited, finite creatures, and we bump into a lot of stuff. And that certainly has an effect on us as we are goers. About a year ago, we did a survey with Biola students, got about 1,300 of you to respond to a health survey about a number of things, including one's kind of experience, their emotional experience, their experience in the midst of going. And this is what you told us. About 55% of you within that year, so this was last year, within that year, had a moment, at least one moment, in which things felt a little hopeless. You may have had a moment when you felt very lonely. 72% said, yeah, I felt very lonely at some point this past year. Some of you said the same thing for feeling sad. Some of you for overwhelming anxiety or anger. About 40% of you said at one point the depression was so strong it was hard to kind of go forward. And then 89% of you, maybe right now in this room, felt exhausted at some point. These numbers are not extraordinary, really. This is pretty close to the national averages for other college students around the country. And it's well within the normal range of human emotions, right, to feel these things. So this is not meant to be depressing or shocking. I myself would say, as I look down this list, probably within that year, I had moments with several of these emotions. So the question is not, is this normal? It's normal to have the full range of human emotions. The question will be, what do I do next? When I experience sadness, when I experience anger, when I experience anxiety, that is not extraordinary, but the important question is, what is wisdom here? What do I do with these emotions that often come from the obstacles that I run into as I seek the goods that I am seeking? Well, I want us to look at a passage this morning to start with from Paul. Because Paul, being human, was like us. He was telic. He was moving toward various goods in his ministry and in his life. And being like us too, he also ran into obstacles, lots of them. And he lists them for the Corinthians. But I want us to actually look at this passage, and I want to read it again. And I want us to talk a little bit about how did Paul handle these feelings, these emotions, these obstacles in his life, and what did he do next? So I'm going to read from 12:1 and then jump to 6:10. I must go on boasting, said Paul, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. But to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me, but this is what he said to me. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. What's the context here? What is Paul talking about? Why this talk of boasting suddenly in 2 Corinthians 12? Well, it turns out, we know from other parts of this letter and the previous one, that the Corinthians were putting some pressure on Paul. They wanted him to kind of be different, to look different. We know in 2 Corinthians 11:30, they wanted him to be kind of more self-aggrandizing. So it turns out in Corinth was kind of 2/3 of the people were relatively free people. About 1/3 of them were slaves, but it meant there was some kind of possibility for upward mobility in Corinth among the nobility, but especially among those who were free, what they would call free men. And there were certain teachers all around Corinth, almost think of them as self-help teachers, dispensing wisdom, dispensing know-how, dispensing ways to go, to move forward. And when Paul actually visits the Corinthians, they're a little disappointed. They say, well, Paul, you could really boast a little bit more, because those other teachers on the streets, they kind of tell their victorious stories and their stories of self-triumph and self-help. Could you do that a little more? Because it's a little embarrassing for us. Perhaps how you talk about the cross and how you talk about foolishness to the Greeks. They also wanted him to be more attractive. They said, well, your letters look great, but you personally are not that attractive. They wanted him to be more forceful. Apparently, it was the mark of many teachers in Corinth that they had a kind of charisma. And we know Paul early on says, I don't want that to be the thing that persuades people. And they wanted him to be wealthier. You remember, he wouldn't take payments for his teaching services. Most of the teachers in Corinth would take payment for their teaching. He had a tent ministry, and he was content with that. But we all know that sometimes you feel like something's worth more when you pay for it. So they said, Paul, why don't you charge people? People will think the gospel is more valuable. And he said, I refuse to do that. He says, I'll tell you though what happens, or what did happen to me. It is possible for me to become conceited. So for Paul, this was a kind of temptation. The Corinthians, in a sense, were tempting him with conceit. And he says, I get a lot of temptation because I have the words of truth in my mouth. Some of you who are teachers or have led Bible studies or ministries know what I'm talking about. It's amazing to have the word of truth in your mouth. And because often our theology runs way ahead of our life, we start to believe we're a little further along than we are because we get to speak this truth. And Paul said, this is a real temptation for him because of what he got to communicate. He had some sense that these revelations were from the Lord. And he says, what the Lord did? To keep me from becoming conceited, he actually put a thorn in my flesh. A messenger of Satan, God allowed in Paul's life. Now, people have asked over the years, over the hundreds of years, what could this have been? Some of them think the thorn might have been some kind of physical malady, a metaphor for, blindness. We're told that he's, at one point in his letter writing, he's having a hard time seeing. He says, look with what large letters I write with my own hand. Some people think it might have been epilepsy, some other ailment. Other people might thought he might be talking about some type of persecution. We know that Alexander, the metal worker in Ephesus, had given him an extremely hard time in his ministries. I don't know if he was talking about him or someone else, but it could have been some kind of persecution. The third possibility is that Paul had some temptation that he was struggling with, a thorn in his flesh. Well, you can read lots of pages on what it might be, but we actually don't know what it was. And I think that's a good thing because really, in some ways, the thorn in this passage stands in for anything that you and I run into. Anything that gets in the way of our success. Anything that becomes something that might produce despair or anxiety or overwhelm us, any weakness we feel as in our going as we move toward the goods we seek. So what does Paul do? Well, he does 4 things in this passage. He asks God to remove it. That should be a great encouragement to us. God is not our genie, right? He's not our cosmic butler. But he does want to hear from his children, and he wants to hear their desires. So apparently, according to Paul, it's okay to ask for this thorn, this thing that is getting in our way, this thing that is limiting. It's okay to ask God to remove it in most cases. Paul says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord that it should leave me. But he also knew that God is the giver of good gifts. And they're not always the gifts we pray for. But we know that Paul was open to what God might give him. And this is what God gave Paul in verse 9. He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul, at least up to the writing of this letter, did not get what he wanted. He did not get the removal of this obstacle. This is what he got. A word from the Lord that says, my grace is sufficient for you. It's almost as if he's saying, see, Paul, in this time in which you are waiting for a good, in which you're seeking it, see in what ways my love for you can be sufficient in this period of waiting. And so Paul trusted this. He trusted that grace could do more. He trusted that in his limits, in his finitude, in his weariness, in his sadness, in his loneliness, in his exhaustion, he trusted that grace, that is the love and presence of God, could actually energize him in his going. And so we're told he moved forward with the love of Christ, saying, for the sake of Christ, I am content with these weaknesses, for when I am weak, then I am strong. That the love of God is a kind of strength. So this is what Paul did. So what do we do? Well, as I said, we wake up every morning seeking some goods. Now, if you're clinically depressed, you actually can't get out of bed. But most of us, we can, because we're seeking some good. As I said, we're telic creatures. And there's some goods we seek, and many of them are good goods. As I mentioned, relationships, health, a modicum of success, security, and control. These are good things to seek. And of course, because they're good things, we love them, we desire them, we attach to them. We attach to these good things. And we anticipate joy if we would get them. And this is all how it should be. But sometimes difficulties come into our lives, and they come in almost like a cloud, where suddenly I can no longer quite see how I'm going to get the good that I'm seeking. I begin to wonder, am I going to return to health? Am I going to succeed in my courses? How am I going to do on exams? I don't know. There's a cloud that's come in, and I have limited time, and I have limited resources. How am I going to attain the goods that I seek and desire? And ladies and gentlemen, that is what a trial is. If you want to know if you're in a trial or not, it's often experienced by something coming between ourselves and the goods we seek. And that's temporarily blocks. Am I going to get this good? And when the trial comes in, now we can not only imagine joy, but we can kind of imagine grief. Like now that enters our imagination, it's like, oh, what if I don't get it? What's going to happen? Am I going to be happy? Am I going to be successful? And along with that comes sometimes anxiety. What is anxiety? Anxiety is simply living in time, not knowing what's going to happen next. And then, by the way, a certain amount of anxiety is normal because we live in time. Some of you are appropriately anxious about your exams. That's okay. You don't know what's going to happen exactly, although I hope you have a modicum of control over the situation. But yeah, sometimes what happens is the degree of our anxiety can tell us if we're over-attaching to that good. And that sometimes happens. Sometimes as we kind of say, it's okay to be, there's a kind of normal anxiety to have, but sometimes when our anxiety is really high, you know what it tells us? Wow, I am really attached to this good. Now, there are goods to be really attached to. Like I said, health, friendships, security. But it's good information for us. It's good self-knowledge when we pursue it, when we run into a trial to think, gosh, how attached am I to this? And what do I do next? What do I do next when I have this kind of cloud and I don't know if I'm going to get it, and my anxiety is pretty high, which shows me I'm pretty attached to my will here? What do I do next? Well, I'm going to suggest a few things. So when we hit these trials, one of the things I invite you to do is to pause. Is simply to hit the pause button and kind of notice what's happening to you and in you when you hit an obstacle or difficulty. I can mention a few things. Some of us tend to catastrophize, right? We tend to think, oh my gosh, if I don't get this, my world will collapse. If I don't get this, my future is in doubt. If I'm not accepted, no one will accept me again, right? So you and I sometimes tend, in our over-attachment to things, to imagine that if this doesn't go our way, then our lives collapse. And often trials just kind of push us over when they don't need to. So part of what the Lord wants to offer us here is perspective. You know, if you do poorly on that exam, there will be other exams. It will not change the course of your life. If you're not invited to a social gathering, well, you weren't invited to a social gathering. But it will not change the course of your life. So one of the things we want to notice is, am I catastrophizing? Am I losing perspective as I seek this good? Another thing you may notice is a kind of reckless anger. Often we get angry when we can't get what we want, right? Believe me, I am connected to the Chapel County person. I've seen some angry emails. So a certain reckless anger. And I want to say, first of all, anger is an appropriate emotion in many cases. Because as I said, there are many goods that we pursue. And so sometimes, especially when it comes to issues of justice and goodness, anger is appropriate when we hit an obstacle to justice for others. But you know, anger is meant to be a transitional emotion. It's meant to actually take us from that obstacle onto something more productive. We're meant to transition into action, to wisdom, to discernment, to trust in God. So it's okay to feel angry, but we don't want to be reckless in our anger. We want to let it transition us to what is the good thing with this energy that we can do next. Sometimes hitting these obstacles leads to despair. Sometimes you'll know because you'll use words like always or never. This never goes my way. Or this always happens. By the way, rarely that's the case, and it's good to look for exceptions. But in despair, what we want to do is remember, no, the Lord, it hasn't always been always or never. It's the Lord has in the past answered my prayer. He has been faithful. And so we want this despair to lead us to remembrance. Some of us have strong fortitude. So when we hit a trial, we're going to move through it. We're going to get through it no matter who we knock over. And here's where we need to be careful, right? Sometimes in a trial, if you have strong fortitude, and by the way, fortitude's good, but sometimes if we just use our natural fortitude, we just run over people to get what we want. So it's okay to have fortitude, but do not sin. Do not sin. And finally, we may discover when we pause that we have, as I said before, a kind of disordered desire. We're a little too attached to a good that maybe we shouldn't be quite as attached to. A little too attached to our popularity on social media, perhaps. You know, studies have shown that a couple negative comments on social media can send people over the edge. God, maybe I'm a little too attached to that feedback. But in any case, the time of pause is the time to think, should I want this as badly as I want it? In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. In other words, is this a good to seek? And what degree should I want it? So let me, this is a lovely slide. What are the things we ought to do in a time of trial? Well, first, let the trial show us what's in our hearts. Let the trial show us what's in our hearts. Again, many of the goods are going to be goods, but it's good to know, Lord, what is in my heart? Because that's where my treasure is. This is Matthew 6:21, right? For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So in the pause, like, Lord, what is it I want? And again, no condemnation, good information. What is in my heart? What is driving my desires? What is it that I seek? And then ask God, Lord, is this a good good? And it may still be a good good. Success on your exams is still a good good. But Lord, how attached am I to these? Are these a good good? And some things you may discover, they're actually not good goods. I don't need to be the most popular person. So it's a chance for discernment. Third, if that's all in order, then Paul shows us that we can pray for what we want. It's nice to know. We can pray for the removal of the thorn. I wouldn't pray for the removal of exams, because those are good goods, right? Yeah, I know. There's a groaning over here. No, don't pray for the removal of exam, but you can pray for the removal of things that may get in the way of the number of hours you've said, I want to stay for that. Lord, I pray for the removal of sickness as you're moving toward exams. Pray for those thorns that are moving toward good goods. That's okay. Now, the kind of slightly bad news is we may not always get what we want because God's not our genie. Thank God. So what do we do in the meantime when we're seeking what we wish? Well, we want to open to the greater goods. Remember I said there are goods that we seek. Well, those are cool. But there's also greater goods. And Paul again names one of them. God says for you, while you're waiting for this thorn to be removed, can you discover and see if my grace is sufficient for you? Because really, what do you and I, at bottom, worry we're not going to get? It's love, it's acceptance, it's security. And so what God is saying to Paul is, see now in this window, if my grace, if my love for you, my covenant with you is sufficient to carry you through this time. And of course, people will say it's during trials that they grow the most spiritually. What do they mean? They mean their trust in God has to deepen. They have to see, is your grace going to be sufficient for me? See, once that trial goes away, suddenly we feel better. We can depend on our own resources for a while. And we kind of have lost that window to deepen the trust in that way. So during trials, we get to pause and say, Lord, is your grace sufficient for me? Do I believe, to what degree do I believe that you love me and care for me and that you are the giver of good gifts, though not always the gifts that I ask for? So that is one greater good, to experience the grace of God. And the second greater good comes also from Paul, but in a different passage, Romans 8, where he says, all these things, including these clouds, they can work together for the good, but what is the good? It is to become more like Jesus. That's the greater good that can never be taken from you. That's the greater good that no cloud can completely obstruct, is becoming like Jesus and sharing in union with God. So sure, there will be times of loneliness. But as we open in these times of trials to the greater goods, we discover that he is still present. It is a window of opportunity to say, Lord, do you still love me, even though I'm not getting my will at this moment? And where there is my will, I notice it and I discover that God has an independent will often. And we say, Lord, I do. I want your will. I want that greater good. I hope it's the same as my health, and often it is. I hope it's the same as a modicum of success, and often it is. But Lord, I recognize that you have an independent will. And so what I do in times of trial and difficulty, as anger and anxiety increases, I say, Lord, I want you. It is what we celebrated this last weekend on Good Friday. Jesus in the garden said, Lord, if there's any other way, this was a thorn in Jesus' flesh, the crucifixion. If there's any other way, but where does he land? Lord, but your will be done. Boy, this is an opportunity for us to practice to what degree we want that. Where there's sadness, as his grace becomes sufficient for us, as we become more like Jesus, there's hope. Where there's anxiety, am I going to get this? There can be relative peace. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything with thanksgivings, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And where there is weakness, where you and I have come to our limits, where we can't move something forward, where we can't kind of keep going, we get the opportunity to experience, Lord, is your continuing love for me a kind of energy, a kind of strength? If any of you have been in love, you notice that when someone loves you, you have hope and meaning and strength. And it's not your own strength. It is actually Christ in you, and it becomes visible to all. So as you move into the last couple weeks of this semester, and as you hit difficulties of various kinds, I just encourage you to pause, to open to what God has for you, to practice that His grace is sufficient, and to actually draw upon that as a source of strength, even when your own limits have been met.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.